Well, people, I guess it's time to begin. So first of all, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jonathan Acuña, and on behalf of the organizing committee of the National Conference for Teachers of English, Costa Rica, I want to welcome you to our next interactive webinar. And here with us, we have Professor Nik Peachey. Nik is Director of Pedagogy at PeacheyPublications, an independent digital publishing company that specializes in the design of digital learning materials. He has been involved in education since 1990 and has more than 20 years experience of working specifically with online and blended learning environments. He has worked all over the world, training teachers and developing innovative and creative products, and is a two-time British Council Innovations Award winner. His customers include British Council, Eton College, Open University, Google Creative Labs, and International House. His more recent projects have included 2 years as pedagogical manager for a 100% online school owned by Macmillan ELT, head of content development for EtonX, a 100% online school owned by Eton College, and content developer for an English and Interfaith Dialogue course designed for the British Council and Al-Azhar's University in Cairo. His books include Hacking Creativity, shortlisted for the 2020 British Council Award for Innovation in Teacher Resources, Digital Tools for Teachers, Trainers Edition, as shortlisted for the 2018 British Council Award for Innovation in Teacher Resources, Thinking Critically Through Digital Media, Digital Video, a manual for language teachers, winner of the 2016 British Council Award for Innovation in Teacher Resources, and Conversation and Listening, a series of lessons for the digital classroom. He co-edited Creativity in the ELT Classroom and Creativity and the Sustainable Development Goals for the British Council. He is editor of the Edtech and ELT Newsletter. Here to speak to us with the presentation, The Challenges of Creating Teacher Presence in the Remote Classroom, What Makes a Good Online Teacher. Please, let's welcome Professor Nik Peachey.
Okay, good. Hi there. Can you hear me? Could you type in a yes or no, depending on whether you can hear me or not? Okay, great. Good. Okay, I'll start to screen share my presentation. Share. Perfect. Okay, great, good. Good. I don't know whether to say good afternoon or good evening or good morning. It's about 7 o'clock in the evening here, so I guess it's probably about midday where you are, something like that, in Costa Rica. Okay, so I'll say good afternoon. Because it'll be good afternoon by the time we're finished. Okay. This session is on the challenges of creating teacher presence in the remote classroom, and that's sort of, I'll go through a few things related to that. Just a quick introduction to me. I have various roles. One of them is as pedagogical director for PeacheyPublications. I also design online courses, write books, and do various bits of training and sort of consultancy work as well. Along the bottom here, there are links to sort of my social media presence and the various things that I publish free online. So by all means, check those out after the presentation if you want to. What I will do is at the end of the presentation, I'll give you a link so that you can have a copy of the presentation with all the links in. So don't worry too much about trying to follow all the links and that kind of thing. You should sort of get them all towards the end of the session. Okay, so let's go on to the next thing. So hopefully what I'm aiming to cover is just a sort of bit of background to this talk and how it evolved. I want to sort of also look at training and what training I believe is necessary to help teachers to make the leap from being a teacher who works in the classroom to a teacher who works in the remote classroom. I want to look a bit at what rapport is and the kind of things that we can do to build rapport, because that's really, fundamental to building our teaching presence in this kind of environment. And sort of in connection with that, how we use the webcam and how we work with it while we're teaching. And then I'll go on to a little bit about team buildings in terms of, getting your students to build rapport with each other and work as a team, the importance of socialization, and something that I think is particularly important at the moment, particularly, at this time in history, and that's empathy, and how we kind of can build empathy with our students and understand what they're going through and things like that as well. So those are the basic things I want to cover. Okay, in terms of the background to this talk, as you've heard already, I've been involved in education for about 30 years. Initially, I was actually a guitar teacher, and my first job was teaching the guitar in a prison. When I was a student, I used to go and teach prisoners how to play the guitar once a week, and that was my first trip into education. I've been involved in digital for more than 20 years now. The first course that I taught online was in 1998. And at that time, the students would download the materials from the internet. And then at the end, once they finished the unit, we would have a telephone call together and have a chat through the materials. So as you can see, things have come quite a long way since then. I did a master's in educational technology back in 1999, which seemed like a revolutionary thing to do at the time. But nowadays it's it seems like quite a long time ago. I've also been a Salter and Delta tutor, and I've worked freelance since 2007. If any of you are having problems with the sound and you're finding it difficult to pick up the volume, I think you need to raise your own volume. I've done the volume check at my own end, so I don't want to sort of make it distort, but sort of turn your volume up if you're having problems. Most of what I'll draw from in this talk comes towards the end of that list of things on my slide. And the main thing is that I was head of learning for an online school called English Up for 2 years. And that was between about 2014 and 2016. And that was a 100% online school with teachers, 70 teachers who were all around the world in different places. And we taught students who were based in Brazil. And that's where some of the insights come from in terms of, understanding the problems that teachers had making that move to sort of working alone at home from working in the classroom. So that's something that we'll try that I'll mainly deal with. Okay, so I'll get started with that anyway. The first thing I want to look at is, the basic areas that are involved in sort of making the move from being a classroom teacher to being an online teacher. And I think there are 6 important areas that really training needs to deal with if we're going to make this move successfully. And these are basically some of the first things. The first thing is it's environmental, and thinking about the environment that you're actually teaching in and the physical things and around you and how they impact on the learning experience. And if you click on here when you're going through this later, you'll see that there's a list of things, thinking about the positioning of camera, lighting and things like that. And we'll go into those in more depth. There's a technical element, and I think, that helps with training. You need to understand your platform, how it works, the different things, how to use microphone, how to use headphones. Be sure that you understand settings and things like that. And I'm sure these are all things that you've had to deal with over the last few months if you've just sort of made this switch into teaching online. Some of the more complex things towards the bottom of this list, the use of browser tabs so that, you can get students looking at other materials as well as have a presentation open and be talking to them. Things about QR codes, I think, are very important, and we'll be using QR codes a little bit in this presentation. Can you type into the chat yes or no if you know what a QR code is or if you've ever used one? Good, lots of yeses. That's really positive. Yeah. So I think QR codes are quite important to make things like this work, sort of digital tools and understanding privacy. So these are some of the technical things I think teachers need to be aware of if they're going to make this shift to teaching online. The other thing that I think is really important, and it'll be the main focus of this talk, is number 3, which is the interpersonal aspects of it. You know, and that's the biggest shift that most teachers have to make, and that's sort of learning to relate to the camera and talk to the camera like it's a person, making eye contact, thinking about how they use their voice and body language and things like that. So I think those are some key things. I think there's a sort of pedagogical area as well in terms of, you know, how do you create engagement and create sort of materials that involve in engagement. And I won't be dealing so much with that. I'll be dealing mainly with the first three, but we'll have a look at those things as well. I think the fifth thing is behavioural, and understanding how students behave online and training them to behave well online as well. I don't know how many of you have a code of conduct as a teacher for how you should behave online and how you should, you know, deal with your students and the things that you should be doing to keep them safe. That's something that we had for all our teachers, but it's also good to have a code of conduct for students as well, and to make sure they know what their responsibilities are in terms of looking after each other and managing each other's safety and privacy, and what the consequences are for dealing with that. Because I think one of the important things if you want to have good rapport in the classroom, you want to have a good classroom atmosphere, is that you know that students feel safe, and they feel safe with each other, and they're not violating each other's privacy or taking photos, posting them online, that kind of thing. And I think the last thing, which we will look at a little bit later on, is motivational, and understanding the impact of isolation and that it has on students' motivation and on teachers' motivation as well, and some of the things that you can deal with for that. So for me, those are the six kind of key areas that teachers need to be aware of when they make this leap. And I think it's not just important that teachers are aware of them. I think it's also important that students are trained before they come into this kind of classroom, that we don't just drop them in here without any prior knowledge, without any prior training or expectations. I don't know how suddenly all of you had to start teaching online, but I'm wondering how many of you actually, or how many of your students actually had some learner training before they were dropped into the online classroom. Maybe you can type in a yes or no, depending on whether you trained your students before they came in or whether you had to do it when they arrived. Yeah, and that's often the case, and that's something that we found was very important, that, you know, if we wanted students to have a successful experience, you know, it's not just about training teachers, you know, students need to be trained as well. I'll just add a little link here. There's a link to an article that I wrote about, you know, about learner training for students and what students should be able to do before they actually come in the classroom. Because I think one of the key elements of success is really your first lesson. You know, if your first lesson works well and everything goes smoothly, then your students are going to have a much more positive attitude, and it's going to be much easier to build good rapport with them and build a good classroom atmosphere. If your first lesson turns out to be chaotic and there are lots of students having problems with sound, they can't hear each other, 15 minutes is spent saying, can you hear me, can you hear me, can you hear me, then it isn't going to be, you know, that's not a great first impression to make. And one of the key things to getting past that is making sure that train learners before they come into the classroom, and that there's an onboarding process to prepare them. Okay. One of the things that I think is really essential is actually sort of build, you know, if you want to do this well, and it's one of the things that we really looked for in our teachers at English Up, and when we were selecting teachers, it was how well could the teacher build rapport with their students. You know, that was, and how quickly, because that was one of the essential things to keeping our students there. But what I'd just like to ask you a question before I go on, and what is rapport to you? What is rapport? There's a QR code there, and if you scan the QR code with your phone, you can do a little questionnaire and put in your response. So finish the sentence. What's good rapport? For those of you who haven't got a QR code scanner handy, I'll type the link to the questionnaire into the chat, so you can see it's just coming through in the chat. So So you can add your responses there if you click on that link that's in the chat. What's good rapport? What are we aiming for when we start a lesson with students and we want to develop our presence and our rapport with students? I'd like to share our responses as they come in. So here's a lot of, you can now see everybody's responses, although you don't see who they are. Yeah, and a lot of the things that are coming through are bang on, you know, that you make students feel comfortable, everyone's respected, you develop sort of mutual trust and creating a good relationship with your students, you know, and that's really, you know, your presence within the classroom is going to help you to do that, and the way you kind of relate to students is going to help you build that good rapport, and that's going to make the lessons either successful or not, depending on your ability to do that. Well, because they need to relate well to each other if they're learning a language within the online classroom. And that's you know, you need a good quiet space to work in. If there's a lot of noise around you, it makes it very difficult to concentrate. It interferes with the sound, and it interferes with the sound for everyone. So you need a good quiet place, private place to do your teaching. You know, that isn't possible for everyone, especially if you've just been dropped into this with very short notice and you don't have room within your home and you've got kids as well. That can be very difficult. But, you know, getting a suitable room and a suitable place to do your teaching that's cool, no distractions, not too much background noise, can really help things become a lot more successful, you know. Also, you know, your background, and by background I mean this background here, you know, I always try to go for something plain, so there's nothing too distracting going on around and behind me. You know, if you've got a white wall, wear dark clothes. If you've got a dark wall, wear light clothes. I have been in webinars sometimes where there's a dark wall and someone's wearing dark clothes and they just look like a floating head with hands in it, and you know, that can be very kind of it can be quite comical, but sort of also quite off-putting. So sort of avoid having any distractions around you, so the focus is on you. I was in a webinar last week, I think, where there was a very good speaker speaking, and she was doing it from her sitting room, but I could see her dog on the sofa, and I kept getting very distracted by what her dog was doing. You know, those things can be really kind of off-putting. And the other thing is light. You know, the more light that you can have and the better lit that you are, and it should be coming towards you, the better. You know, and in the top left hand corner, you know, there's a lighting rig, and you know, that would be the ideal thing, is that you have this marvelous lighting rig that's diffused light, but you know, most of us can't have that, and certainly I don't have here, and I'm struggling with the light here at night. But things to avoid are, you know, don't be a silhouette. If you've got a window behind you, or if you've got light behind you, you turn into a silhouette, and that's very hard for students to read any of your body language or facial expressions or anything like that. So try to avoid that. Try to also avoid having the bright light on you as well. You know, it's tempting to light yourself up with a good bright light, but if you've got to be in front of that light for a few hours, you're going to end up with headaches and things like that. What I tend to find, and what I'm using now, is just a desk lamp, pretty much like the one in the picture, and it's pointed against the wall this side, and I can deflect the light off the wall, and that gives me some kind of lighting that's not too harsh, doesn't make too many shadows, but sort of people can see me, and you know, I'm reasonably well lit even in this bad light at night. So kind of lighting is quite important, and getting that right. What's more important, I think, though, is the webcam and where you place your webcam. We've got a nice little picture of the guy standing up in front of his computer, and that's actually one of the things that I do. I'm standing at the moment so I can move around a lot, but my webcam should be about on the level with my eyes, so that your screen is parallel to your body and your eye level with the webcam, and that will help you make eye contact with your students. And that's very important. If any of you are using laptops, you're probably doing something like this that you can see in the picture there. And it's you know, I realize the problem, but if you've got a laptop open, the screen is pointing back and the camera's pointing up at you, it tends to distort the image of you. It also limits the amount of your body that can be seen. You know, if your students are only seeing your head, or even worse, just the top of your head, that becomes a real problem. So if you are working with a laptop, it's better to use something like this, which you can see underneath the laptop there. It's a little riser, a little slope, and these are sort of very cheap, or they're easy enough to make. And what it does is it lifts up your keyboard so that you can open the flap of your computer monitor flat, and then it gives then the screen is parallel to your body, and the camera distortion isn't disfiguring you, and yet students can see more of your body then as well. So that's something that can help with that. One of the things that's very important is to try to make eye contact, but you need to try to make eye contact with the camera, not the screen. You know, if I'm looking at the screen, my head is down like this, you know, you have to try to look at the camera, and that way you're more likely to be able to make eye contact with students. It's a bit more difficult as well if you wear glasses. If I take them off, you know, my eye contact gets a bit better, but I can't see anything then, so that becomes a bit more difficult. But you know, actually looking at the camera can really help to build your presence, build your ability to communicate with your students like they're people. You know, one of the tricks that I do, I don't know if you're all using Zoom at the moment. I don't know if you use Zoom to teach, but you know that you can drag around the video picture of you. If you drag it up to the top of your screen, just below the camera, which is what I'm doing now, you're more like, your eye tends to go where you are. You tend to look at yourself when you're doing these webinars. So if you drag it up to the top of the screen so that it's underneath your webcam, you're more likely to be making eye contact with your students when you're looking at that. So that can really help. No, the other thing, and for me, one of the most important things actually is just to play with the distance. You know, take a step back and move away from your computer. I'm standing about a meter away from my computer, and that means that much more of me is visible. I can use my hands. I can do all those things that teachers do in the past. I can get contractions onto my fingers. I can do sort of things with my hands. It gives me space to show things to my students. Look, this is this is Ganesh. He's an Indian god that I discovered in India. So you can show students things and step backwards and forwards. And it gives you much more space to work in. You know, we're used to standing at the front of a classroom and having lots of space to move around all the time. If you're sitting really close to your computer, it really limits the amount of space you can work in. I've just got this little space here now because I'm so close. But if I take a step back, you know, I've got all this space here. I can move around, use my hands, do some mime if I want to, do some dancing if I want to, things like that. And it opens up a few of those games. I used to play, I don't know if you've ever played this game with your students. There's a game called The Magic Object, and where you have a magic object in your hand. Can you type in a yes or a no if you've played the magic object? So the magic object, you have a magic object, and you can show the students your magic object, and you can make the magic object into anything. So I'm going to ask you what the magic object is, and you can type it into the chat. Okay, what do you think the magic object is? No, it was cat. Well done, a cat. So whoever got that right, you can actually pass the magic object to them through the camera. So you can take it now from the camera, and now it's your turn to make the magic object. So you can sort of play the magic object yourself. But just being that little bit further away from the camera, you know, gives you the chance to use things like that and do things like miming, passing things through the camera to your students, and it makes it all a bit more real. And of course, you know, playing a game like this, where you're getting students to mime, gets them to move a bit further back from their camera as well, and pushes them to use the camera. You know, I know that some students are, I've heard, are reluctant to switch the camera on, especially if they're in a group. They feel self-conscious, maybe, you know, there are things behind them or something like that. But sort of if you start to make it fun and play mind games, you know, that can sort of build the presence, build some rapport, and help students get used to working with the camera. So that's, you know, that's one of the important things, I think. Use that space, use some body language, use facial expression, work with the proximity. You know, you can actually tell your students off by coming up close now to the screen and wagging your finger at them when they want to. You're not listening, are you? I'm watching you. You know, that kind of thing. You have the chance to move between those different positions, and that can help a lot. Somebody's scribbling on my screen. How dare they? I think one of the other important things is to, you know, learn how to use the sound. I mean, this is an important aspect of the technical side. You know how to use the sound, know how to turn it up and down, know how to help your students with it. But the other aspect of that is to think about how you use your voice as well. You know, and I think of the use of voice is very important in this kind of environment. Again, you know, as a teacher, many of us are used to projecting our voice to the back of a classroom with maybe 20 or 30 students in, you know, and if you have a webinar, or if you meet someone online like this who's used to doing that, and they talk so loudly, it can become very difficult. You find that people are kind of, well, everyone, how are you? Well, what are we going to do today? And things like that, which might be, you know, might be okay in a physical classroom, but when you've got headphones on and speakers, it makes it very difficult to listen to in a virtual classroom. So, you know, learn to use your voice, learn to use it much more softly. You can speak much more quietly and play with the dynamics of your voice as well. Think about how you use it in terms of what you want your students to do. You know, maybe there are times when you want to give instructions and you need to move forward, and you say, okay, listen now. I'm giving you some instructions. Okay, now when you want to step away and get students to work by themselves, you can actually step away and give them more space and seem less intimidating. So think about how you use your voice to move between instructions, talking to students, giving explanations, those kinds of things. Okay, the next thing I want to move on to is team building, because what tends to be a problem for a lot of teachers isn't just the problem of the rapport that they build between themselves and their students, but you have to also build the rapport between your students and each other. You know, a lot of us get our students to do work in groups, but that isn't the same as being a team. There's a difference between, you know, doing group work with students and making students into a team. I'd like you to ask you a question now. So what do teams have that groups don't have? And I'd love, if you've got a QR code, you can scan that, or I'll pass you a link if you want to put it in here. Can do that, and I'll go back to my presentation. So the link is in there. So how are teams different from groups? That's my question. I'll give you a couple of minutes to answer that, and I'll step out while I do. Okay, I'm back. Let's see what we've got. Yeah, collaborative work, helping each other, teams. Mm-hmm. Yeah, lots of good stuff there. Yeah, okay. So, you know, if you're working, let me just click on that. If your classroom is a lot like that, with you at the center, giving instructions to your students, then probably it's more like a group. That's not a team, and probably the team dynamics or the dynamics of the classroom aren't going to work as well. All the communication is going through you. Students are working more individually. Ideally, in terms of communication, your classroom should be more like this, and this one looks more like a team. You're at the center, the communication is going backwards between you and your students, but students are also happy communicating with each other as well. Having that kind of communications relationship can help you to build your teams. And these are the kind of key differences that you want to try and work towards. Let's just move that over there. Don't know how well you can use that, read that, but you can read through it later if you want to, or catch up with it later. I think, goal orientation is very important. Teams work together towards a common goal. So when you're thinking about sort of tasks that you give to your students, try to make it the output something that's collaborative, or that they're judged on or evaluated together rather than individually. Groups are just people working towards their own goals. In teams, commitment is stronger. They work together and they're committed together. Teams are much more likely to collaborate well together. They have similar goals. They have their own ways of working together. If you have contrasting views in a team, teams welcome contrasting views and want to hear each other's opinions. They want to find out what the other person has to say, because they see that as being supportive and something that can help them. Whereas groups tend to worry about different views, and they're worried about contrasting views, worried about giving their own opinions. In teams, the attitudes to peers would be much better. They see them as somebody who's giving them support, whereas in groups, often people see them as somebody who's competing with them. Problem solving becomes a good thing and something that students do together if you can build them as a team. They work together to solve problems. In groups, people are often reluctant to share solutions to problems because they're worried about being criticized. And again, decision making, teams make decisions together and they're involved in deciding things together. Whereas individuals in groups may be very reluctant to participate in decision making. They're worried about whether they're making the right decision or the wrong decision, or what other people will think about their decision. So, enabling your classes and enabling your students to work as a team becomes much more important if you want to build good presence and a good rapport and get students working within the classroom. So here are some things that can help you to build your groups into teams. I think one of the important things is right at the beginning that you do lots of getting to know you games. I'm sure lots of you have getting to know you games that you do on first lessons anyway, and ideas for those. But I think that's very important, and I've added a few here. So if you click on the interactive button, these are some examples of things that you can do in the very early stages to get students and getting to know each other better and sort of help to build them into teams. One example here is, showing photos of their life or someone in their life. Sharing some personal photos together can really help. I've got one here. Let's find one here. Okay, so there's a picture there. This is my oldest daughter. That was when she was about 8 years old. Now she's 21 years old and still looks pretty much the same as that. So just sharing pictures of things from your life and getting students to share pictures of things from each other's life can help build up their rapport together. As students are at home and they have cameras on their laptops, you could actually get them to do a tour of their house or a tour of their room and show them the rest of the room. I can't show you my room because I'm using a big desktop and the screen's a bit too big for that. Sharing games about personal facts. If you collect together personal facts from your students and then get them to guess who those facts are about and find out who they're about. The last of these suggestions for getting to know you games at at the bottom here is one that's called The Aliens Have Landed. And this is a new one for me. I haven't tried it, but I really like this one. And what you do is you put your students into groups and you ask them you tell them that aliens have landed on the planet Earth, but they can't speak English. And your students have to decide on 5 images that they would show the aliens to inform them about culture here on Earth. So they have to work together to decide what those 5 images would be. And that's a really nice way to get them to sort of think about their personal values, because when you do an activity like this, you know, it's really about your values and what you feel is important. And that's a good activity, sort of a getting to know you activity, and a good way to get students working together. I think it's great to have team names and try to get students taking roles within the teams. A lot depends on the size of your class. If you've got a small class, you could make them into one team and decide who has which roles. Or if they're a larger class, you could break them into smaller teams so that they kind of work together and perhaps even work competitively with against other teams. But, you know, have roles within the teams. You know, somebody could be a team leader. They could appoint their own team leader. They could have a name for their team. Some of them could be the specialist researchers. Somebody could be the grammar person who's good at grammar. Somebody could have vocabulary knowledge and take responsibility for the team's vocabulary, and they're, you know, making sure they all learn their vocabulary. But try and think of roles that you can give them or that they can choose for themselves within their team. Give them autonomy of choice and get them sort of choosing the kinds of things that they do. Here I've got an example of quite a good team building game that you could try, which I like. And it's, you know, students imagine that they're on a desert island together and they have to choose 8 different things that they would take and so they choose the most important things that they would take. And they also decide what role each of them would have within the desert island. So which of them would be the leader of the team on the desert island? Which one would go and collect firewood? Which one would go fishing? Which one would hunt for food? Which one would, you know, which ones would build the housing or something like that? So that they think about those roles and discuss who would do what and what they would take. And at the end, there's sort of quite a nice reflection task you can give them, so that you can get them thinking about how well they worked as a team and, you know, how well they did, and things like that. So I think, you know, giving them team building exercises and team building tasks like that can really help with them, help build them into a team, helps build the rapport. It takes the focus away from you all the time and gets students working together. Here at the bottom, this last little interactive button at the bottom of my slide, there's a link to a slide with 55 team building games on. And these are team building games for virtual environments. I'll pass you the link to that and you can check it out later. A lot of those things are based around building business teams, and they're not designed for, all of them aren't designed for younger learners, but there's a wide variety of things like that. And there's some very odd and wacky ones, so you might like to try some different ones out with your students. But I think, you know, playing team building games, you know, can really help a lot with building the rapport and building your presence. I think, you know, one of the other really important things is also socialization time. You know, in an environment like this, I think that's particularly important, especially at the moment as well, because, you know, most of our students come to class because they want to socialize. It's a hard realization to make, but actually a lot of students don't come to class to learn. They're coming there to sort of meet their friends, to have a good time, or if they're going to university, you know, one of the really important things about going to university or going to school is socialization. You know, and that's something that we kind of cut our students off from in this kind of environment, especially if it's just us, you know, managing the class. So I think it's worth thinking about, you know, how you make socialization time within your lessons. it could be that, you just have 10 minutes where you put them into breakout rooms and they can just chat to each other and, catch up and things like that. Or you have socialization breaks in the middle of the lessons. It depends on how long your lessons are and how often you see your students. But giving them some time just to chat with each other and socialize, I think can really help build, the atmosphere in the class, build the rapport, help with presence and those kinds of things. And I think that's very important thing to remember. In terms of socialization, these are some examples of online games that you can play, because playing games together is a great way to socialize, and these are some very useful ones. There are 3 different links. One of them is to something called Quiz Party, and those are kind of BuzzFeed personality type quizzes. And what you can do is students can go into groups of 4 and they all play the same quiz, and they sort of exchange ideas and things like that. There's one called Fishbowl, again, which is a group playing game which you can try out. And there's this one, my favorite one is this one up the top here, and this is called Brightfall. And this has 4 different games on, and they're the kinds of games we often play in the language classroom. I'll just open that and see. And when you get to the site, you don't have to register or log in or anything. You go to host a game like that. And on the side, you should see over here, on the right-hand side, I hope you can see that, there are 4 different types of games to choose from. So the first one is would you rather? So it gives questions like, would you rather do this, or would you rather do that? Would you rather climb a mountain, or would you rather, fall in the sea? Spot My Lie, which is an interesting one, which is based around the two truths and a lie kind of game. So it asks you a question, and you have to give 2 true answers and 1 false answer, and then students have to guess which one each other is giving that's true or false. There's Question of the Day, and there's also this one called Describe It, which is an interesting one. This one is a bit like that game that I used to play a game in the classroom called Backs to the Board, where I'd write a word on the board behind my students and they would sit facing it, and the other students would have to describe the word to them and they would have to guess it. Describe It is a bit like that, or a bit like charades or something like that. So one student sees a word and the others have to guess. That's quite a good one. We might be able to try one out. Let's see if we can try one out. Want to play a game? Spot the Lie. Let's try and play Spot the Lie. Okay, so I'm going to enter my name, Nik, and then I'm going to create a room. You only have 1 minute to spot the lie. You can actually choose the amount of time that you get to do that. Okay, so I've copied the link now because I've created the room, and I'm going to share it here in the chat, and you should be able to open it. That's funny. Well, it's not funny. I can't get the start the game. I should be able to click the button and then it starts the game, and everybody has to guess who everybody is. I'm afraid that's not working though. Okay, so the best laid plans of mice and men. Give it a try with a few less people. I think we've just kind of overloaded it a bit. But playing these kinds of games, or putting students in groups to play these kinds of games, can be really useful. Maybe you can try it with a smaller group. This one, as I said, is a quiz party one, and again you kind of choose a quiz. There's one about Disney villains. You copy the link, and then 4 people can go into groups and play it together. So I've just shared the link for you, and once 4 people arrive there, you can click on Start the Party, and they play the game together and go through the quiz together. So okay, we've got 3. Okay, so I'll start the party. 3, 2, 1. Which animal would you be? I would be the cat. Is my greatest quality. I'm patient. Best way to get back at an enemy. I don't know. Poison them, I guess. Messy people. Close friend. Cape. Eternal life. Colour. and done. So they can do their quiz together, compare and work through it together and compare answers and chat about it. So if you put them in a breakout room together, that's a kind of nice way to kind of to get them playing games where they get to know each other a bit and they can talk about which answers they're having. Yeah, sorry, it's limited to groups of 4. So you'd have to put them into groups of 4 in their breakout rooms and then get them to play it together. Okay, well, I'll come back and see what happens later there. Anyway, so those are some examples of games that are designed for the remote classroom. So those are some things that you can try with your students to get them socializing a bit, having fun, and using some English. Yeah, it's limited to a maximum of 5 per group, which I guess in some ways is a nice factor. No, not finished yet. Okay, I think one of the other things that is important to understand is students' motivation and how their motivation is going to be impacted by working in this kind of classroom and being sensitive to that. And I think one of the good ways to think about that is to think about empathy and sort of actually to do a study on your students. And this is something that you could try. There are 2 ways of doing this. One is, there's a list of questions there that you can start thinking about in relation to your students and how they're working. Because I think often as teachers, if we're having a problem in the classroom or one of our students isn't responding well, or they're not doing as well as they should be, often we tend to blame ourselves and think it's something that we're doing wrong, or something wrong with the platform, or something like that. But it's good to actually start thinking about the students and what's going on in their lives, and what things motivate them. What's a bad day like for them? What things are they worried about? What are they afraid of? What keeps them awake at night worrying? What responsibilities do they have, and what obstacles do they face? What gets them up in the morning and motivates them? How do they measure success? How do our students measure success, and how could we motivate them to do better? So some things that we could think about in relation to our students. Finished the game, but stuck with no response. No, there's still somebody who hasn't finished. So, okay. So the other thing that you see on the other side of the screen is something called an empathy map, and I'll pass you a link to an article about empathy mapping. Yeah, and empathy maps are a way of sort of trying to think about and analyze what's happening with your students and why they may or may not be motivated. And you work your way around the map. So the picture in the middle should be a picture of your student, or you should visualize your student or your students in general. And in the top part of the map here, you write about who you're exploring, and this is something that you could do together as a group of teachers, analyzing your students, actually, who you're exploring, what do you think they need to do, what do they need to do, what are their aims and what are their goals in relation to learning English or whatever you're studying with them. Think about what they see in relation to English. What are the things that they see that influence their attitude towards English and learning English? Are they seeing things on the news that influence them? Are they seeing things in newspapers? What influences their attitudes? Then things about what do they say? What do they say about what they're learning? What do people around them? What are people around them saying? What do they do? What is their behavior? What kinds of things are they doing? What are the things that they're hearing from other people that may influence their behavior? And what do they think and feel? And then once you've thought about all those different things in relation to your students, you think about their pains and gains. What do they stand to gain from learning English? What do they want to gain? Why are they studying it? What are their goals? And what are their pain points? What are the things that they're finding difficult? What are the things that are the obstacles and the things that are getting in their way? And working around that map, thinking about your students and working around that map can help to give you a better understanding of what's going on with them and, the kinds of problems that they're having. So, you know, that's a kind of nice tool in terms of, you know, thinking about motivation, empathy, building empathy with students, and, you know, thinking about the problems that they might have beyond, you know, yourself and the pedagogy that you're using. So I think that's something that's useful to do. Okay, I'm kind of at the any questions stage. You know, I think that's as much as, you know, I want to sort of cram into this session. Perhaps this is a good point at which we could go into the breakout rooms, and you know, you could work together, have a chat about the things that we've gone through here, and think about any questions that you'd like to come back and ask me. I'll give you a link and the QR code for feeding in questions. So there's a link there if there's any questions that you want to add. And while you're in the breakout rooms, you can chat through things together and sort of add some questions to there. And I'll try and deal with them when we come back. Is that okay? Can we go into the breakout rooms now? The first one is, I can answer easily. Is it possible to get the slides? Yes, I'll give you a link to all the slides at the end, and it's all totally interactive and online, so you can sort of just click through them whenever you want to. And I'll give you a QR code to scan as well. Are we going to do the breakout rooms? Is it?
Sure, we can try. First, we're going to show a small piece of information about it, and then we can try getting into breakout rooms.
Fine. Let's see how it goes. If not, we'll just come back and do the Q&A and finish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. So once again, I'll pass the link to the questionnaire. I'll put it into the chat. So if you want, it's in here. If you want to ask a question, you can type it into the field, or if you've got a QR code scanner, scan the QR code on your phone, and there's a little field in there where you can start adding questions, and then we can all see them together clearly, and I can work down through them and see which ones I can answer. Okay, I'll just put the link into chat again, so if you have questions, by all means, click on that. It'll open a tab for you, and then you can add your questions. The first one about the slides is, as I said, is an easy one. Yeah, I'll pass a link to all the slides, and you'll see them exactly as they appeared here, and with all the different functions in them as well. So by all means do that. So that question is an easy one. I'll mark that as answered. Any tips for those long silences during sync times? You know, it's funny how we as teachers, we've become a bit afraid of silence, and I think silence is a good thing. You know, give students something to think about. You know, ask them to close their eyes and visualize what they've learned in the lesson. You know, I actually wrote, I'll see if I can find a link to it. I wrote a lesson, sorry, I wrote an article about visualization and its role in language teaching. And I think, you know, visualization is something and silence is something that can work very well for us. And yeah, I'll go back to it here. I'll put the link into the chat room. So there's a link there to an article on visualization, and actually getting some silence, getting students to think about things with their eyes closed and just try to imagine them, you know, can be a really good way either to prepare them for a speaking activity, or to help them revise, or, you know, or to help them just them thinking about their goals or what they've learned, you know. So work with the silence and make it useful. That's, you know, my best suggestion, I think. Next question is, what advice would you provide to elementary school teachers working remotely and trying to have students in small teams? That's a difficult question to answer. I think particularly if you're working with very young learners, you know, getting students into breakout rooms may not work quite as well if your students are really young. It depends on how much you can trust them and how mature they are. You know, the ideal thing would be just to teach small classes, but I just don't know if that's possible. You know, we're not always in control of, you know, okay, we're teaching remotely, you know, let's have small classes instead of big classes. Could you type in and just say, you know, how many students do you have in your group when you're teaching a remote class like this? How many students on average are you teaching? Yeah, that's really 37. Wow. 19, 28, 35. Yeah, I mean, you know, ideally, if you're working in an environment like this, you know, you should be, and you want it, you know, it's an English class where you want students to interact with each other and go into groups, then, you know, ideally it should be around 12. You know, okay, it's fine to have 200 if you just want to give a lecture, but, you know, if you want the lesson to be interactive and you want students to develop their speaking skills, then, you know, ideally it would be about 12 to 16 maybe, and lots of those group sizes are really way above that, so that's really quite difficult. About motivating students, and you know, the situation is very stressful, I think, and a lot of students are very anxious, and rightly so, you know, and I think the best way to motivate them and you know, is to try and make the lessons as much fun as possible so that they can forget about, you know, these awful things that might be happening, and just try and sort of get on with enjoying the classes, really. How can we engage our students from the beginning of the class? You know, I think, you know, as soon as they get into class, give them something to do. You know, maybe put them into breakout rooms right at the beginning, and make that their socialization time. You know, especially as students are often late coming into classes like this. You know, if you make the first 10 minutes times where they can come in and chat to each other, then that might help with the kind of beginning of the class. Tips about working asynchronously. That's a huge question, but I think it's good to give the students something to do to prepare before the lesson. So if they're prepared to do some asynchronous work, get them, you know, working on looking at websites, learning something that they can come in and share and teach during the class can help. Question about how to create QR codes. QR codes are really easy to create. There's a website here that I'll show you. This is called the QR code generator. And all you need to do to make the QR code is copy a link, click on here where it says URL, and paste it in, and that generates your QR code here. And then you just click on save, give it a name, and save it to your computer. So I save the file there. So once that QR code is saved, I can add it to any materials, and that you know, I can put it onto my presentation, and that enables my students to sort of access these QR codes. I'll pass a link to that to you now. That's the QR code generator. Just copy a URL in. You can actually use it for free text as well. You can type in things like that, and it will generate the code that will read that, so that will work offline as well. But that's the QR code generator, simple tool for making QR codes. And then you just have to make sure your students know how to scan them. Oh, sorry, wrong slide. Okay, I missed, where was I? QR codes, questions, yeah, answered. Is this recorded for a second attendance? Yeah, I think the session's being recorded, so you can come back to it. What do I say about assessment? Assessment is difficult. I don't think assessment necessarily needs to change, though, just because we're in this kind of classroom. Although, you know, it does make it more difficult in terms of monitoring your students. You know, once they're in those breakout rooms, you have to go around and check to see that they're doing the work, and so that there is some follow-up. But, you know, it is important. How to make team building with ESL students with basic level from primary school. If they've got a very basic level and they're at primary level, I think you can still do it, but maybe you need to use their first language if that is the case, you know. And if they're really young, decide what role they will have, put them into teams. You can still get them to choose their team name. You can still get them to decide who's the team leader and who's going to take responsibility, but give them stuff to do together. You know, project work, I think, is particularly good for team building. If you do any project-based learning, you know, do some checking up on project-based learning and see how that works. How to make team building with ELT, but it's the same one. How can we do in order to generate a different link for each open question in Mentimeter? I tried and it gives one link per entire presentation. Okay, so that question's quite, what I do is, I just create one slide presentations. The question is about Mentimeter, which is the tool that I'm using here, which I've embedded in here for this presentation. Make each slide a different presentation, so that way you get a unique code for each slide. Many good options there. How do we figure out the right ones without being overwhelmed? There are lots of good tools, good platforms, good things to use. I mean, my best advice is think about what you need to do and use the tool that will do it in the simplest possible way. Don't try to make life complicated for yourself. It's complicated enough already. Use the simplest tool that you can to get to where you want to go. Oh, I've done it again. Sorry. Would you share a link to breakout rooms? Oh, no, that one's. What suggestions do you have for teamwork once back in July? Yeah, I mean, we can have teamwork without having physical contact. You don't have to have physical contact to have a team. I think, working in, or maybe you can have the teamwork done online asynchronously. So it doesn't have to be done in the physical classroom and it doesn't have to be done physically. So, set them up for things to do in the remote classroom themselves. They can even set up their own Zoom classes. Percentage of time to socialization and team building. I think it really depends on how much time you have, but if I was thinking of a 1 hour class, I would think of 10 minutes out of every 60 should be socialization. Team building is a different thing. I mean, team building you can build into your class and into your lessons so that they're achieving the aims of the lesson together. And I think that's sort of something that's important. And maybe that's something worth looking at project-based learning to see how that's done. Best way to give instructions before teamwork, have them written down, have a written copy of them, back it up with voice, For adult learners, it depends. It's really difficult to answer questions about specific groups of students without knowing them. I think things like this do work for adult learners. Just find out what they're interested in and do what interests them. I think that's probably the most important thing with every group of students. What you do with them should be driven by what they're interested in. It shouldn't just be about grammar and reading skills or speaking skills. It should be aimed towards fulfilling what they want to do and their goals. What should I do because my class has more than 80 students? Yeah, 80 students is difficult, especially in this, it's not so difficult in terms of breakout rooms and getting them in there. Some platforms do that automatically, but in terms of monitoring, it involves a lot of trust. You've just got to trust that your students are in there doing what you ask them to do. But that is really, really difficult. I think that's the most difficult one. Okay, there are no more questions, so I'll move on to my final slide. The QR code here is the slide for this presentation. Also, there's a book which you can download for free here, which is called Digital Tools for Teachers. I'll give you a link to it, but the link is here anyway on the presentation if you go through it again. And if you follow the link and then you use this code here, it says add coupon. So go to the link, click on buy now, add your email details, and then add the coupon code R98UIQ1JL6. So if you add that coupon code, that will reduce the price of the book to nothing, and you can download the book for free. Okay, so if you want to get that free book, Digital Tools for Teachers, it's quite an old one, but there's still lots of links to different things that you can use. Make a note of that code and then go there and download it for free. If you want the link to this presentation, you can scan the QR code there. I'll also copy the code into the chat room and you can open it directly from here. There it is, my presentation link is there. I'll keep adding that. So if you want the presentation to go back through it afterwards, by all means do go through, have a look at all those links. The code is there to download the free book. And I hope you enjoy it and find it useful. It's been nice to meet you and to get round to the breakout rooms and speak to a couple of you, and I hope this has been useful and sorry, my voice is going, and that you find the materials helpful and things like that. And good luck with your teaching. Try and make it fun. Try to enjoy it. It can still be fun. You don't have to be in the physical classroom to have fun. And
yeah, thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor Peachey. I would suggest, if it were possible, that you also share with the audience the newsletter that you have that is like coming like every month. That would be great. So yeah, you can get like lots of ideas coming from.
Let me see if I can find the link to it. Hang on. Okay, back to that one. So if you go to, I'm going to put a link into, I publish an educational technology newsletter. And if you sign up for it, it's free and you'll get regular updates about different links and tools and articles about technology. And the link, I'm just putting it in here. It's a very long link, but if you click on that, that should work. So if you click on the link and sign up for that newsletter, you'll get regular updates about different aspects of technology, different free tools. Every now and then there's a free offer for books and courses and things like that. So if you're really interested in following up about educational technology, by all means, follow that. Okay. So,
thank you.
As I said, I hope that's been useful. Hope you can download the book, look again at the presentation, follow up on those links and the ideas, and enjoy teaching online. Thanks very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick. On behalf of the organizing committee of the National Conference for Teachers of English, Costa Rica, I want to thank Professor Nik Peachey for his presentation today and for his willingness to share his time and contribute to the success of this online event. Let's all give him a warm virtual applause, if you don't mind.
Thank you.